Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about Senna. More specifically, I'm going to be giving my general critique on Senna's design. Now, over the years, there have been a couple of champions that Riot have released that I've really felt like have had issues from a design perspective. And now, what this means is that unlike other channels that tend to talk about a champion's physical appearance or their character design, right? The immediate example that springs to mind is TB who talks a lot about the design of the character themselves and how it matches their backstory and how it sort of plays into the character themselves. What I'm going to be talking about here today is going to be focusing more on the mechanical side of things. Talking about specifically how a champion's kit is designed, the specific things and tools that the champion has at their disposal, how the champion was intended to be designed versus how it actually has ended up being played, that sort of a thing. Now, as an aside here, now this is not going to revolve around balance. In fact, this discussion is mostly going to be balance agnostic. The whole point of this is that I don't care if the champion is balanced. I don't care if the champion is underpowered. I don't care if the champion is overpowered. That's really not what I'm critiquing here. I'm critiquing the overall design of the character's kit in the first place. So with that sort of caveat out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about Senna a little bit. Now, Senna came out a couple years ago now, and she was sort of a big deal when she was released, as she is yet another episode of Riot trying to create a champion design or character based off of a character that had previously existed in the lore and was kind of mentioned, and a lot of people were really sort of curious as to would that character ever see the light of day as an actual playable champion. For a while, Riot's answer, of course, was no. In fact, I remember shortly after Lucian was revealed, Riot talked a lot about how if Lucian ever were to kill Thresh or break the lantern, that Senna's soul would simply pass on to the afterlife. She was dead forever no matter what happened. The only question is whether or not Lucian would be able to set her soul to peace, or whether he would join her for an eternity of damnation in the lantern. The other implication being from a gameplay perspective would be that if Senna ever got out of the lantern, that Lucian's damage output would be halved because he would give her back her gun that he took off of the ground after she was captured by Thresh. That was a joke made by one of the devs as well. So again, the whole point was that Senna was not expected to be a character, but obviously things changed, and when Riot eventually did Kai'Sa, who was another character that had been long hinted in the lore as eventually being a character in League of Legends, Kassadin had a daughter who was sucked off into the void in old lore, and Riot essentially revisited that concept with a version of Kai'Sa, who ended up being a commercial success, kit issues notwithstanding. She's another one I'll talk about here in a bit. But so Senna was sort of the second iteration of these, and it's highly likely that we'll see more of these in the future, as Riot has already sort of started seeding more characters to eventually bring into the game as playable champions. But so in that regard, when Riot do these sort of characters that existed in the lore, just weren't champions quite yet, they tend to take a very thematic approach, shall we say. And while I don't necessarily think this is a problem, the biggest issue I think I have with a lot of these kit designs is that Riot tend to prioritize thematic cohesiveness over gameplay. And that is always a mistake when designing a game, especially a competitive multiplayer game. Because the whole point is that the game needs to be balanced, the game needs to be fun to play, and everything needs to work very well together, especially all the moving pieces you have in games, all of the champions and the systems like items, or even just in general like systems changes like how fast minions move, how much damage they do, right? The item system, the jungle, spawn timers, all of that all has to sort of mesh well together if you want to have a competitive multiplayer game, and anything being out of whack can cause some problems. And this is why Riot have to design things around gameplay concerns rather than thematic cohesiveness. It doesn't matter if this dragon should do significantly more damage to Brand than other champions because it's a water dragon, it's hitting him with water, right? That's a thing that Riot don't do because it wouldn't make any sense from a gameplay perspective. It would just straight up make Brand weaker in games in which you had ocean drakes, for example. So with that in mind, Senna's kit I don't feel was approached from this degree at all. In fact, I think Riot tilted way too heavily into the thematic approach and not enough into the actual kit design approach. And by that I mean I think Riot started with Senna's design making a couple of assumptions and a couple of things that they said, we know we want to do this, and instead of essentially looking at this and saying, is this feasible, is this balanceable, they did it anyways. And I feel like that's why Senna's been on a bit of a balance roller coaster ever since her launch, and it's because of the inherent problems with her kit. The biggest things here, of course, are the fact that Senna is an AD carry support, which is an oxymoron that really shouldn't exist in League of Legends, and that Senna's kit is sort of a patchwork of a variety of different abilities that all ended up on the same kit for approximately no reason other than Riot either didn't have a home for them or they wanted them there for specific flavor reasons. Now, The first half of Senna's kit, of course, is these sort of flavor reasons. Absolution is obviously a sort of more wholesome counterpart to Thresh's Damnation passive. They're both about soul collecting, and while you could make the argument that Senna's is better because she can collect souls from a range, I would argue that that's not actually that big of a deal, because Senna is a ranged champion and has a lot less leeway to step up and actually walk over souls as opposed to Thresh. So that's not really a big problem. The biggest problem here is that she gets gold, but we'll get to that when we talk about the AD carry support thing. But obviously, that exists specifically because in her lore, Senna was imprisoned in Thresh's Lantern. Essentially, that's it. It does a couple things from the balance perspective, or from the design perspective, for creating an AD carry support, but as we'll talk about, that was a problem in and of itself, and I don't think this passive really does a lot to address that particular concern, so we'll move on. The other issue, of course, is Piercing Darkness, which I think is fine as an ability, honestly. It was only included because Lucian exists, and if it had been a one-off, I think I would have been okay with it, but already you can kind of see how the first two ability slots that Senna has were just straight up ripped from other champion kits and slapped onto Senna's kit because, well, other champions she was related to had them in her kit, so therefore she has to have them as well, which doesn't make any sense from a design perspective, but theoretically, you could have based the rest of the kit around this. Except for then that Riot didn't. Instead, they chose to take a couple of Senna's other ability slots and essentially make them homes for abilities that they'd tried out in the past and decided they didn't want to do. Curse of Black Mist, for example, was initially prototyped as a Rengar ultimate, where he would essentially give himself and all nearby champions bonus movement speed and stealth to allow you to kind of stealthily bring an entire hunting party on top of hapless champions. Now, this was eventually scrapped on the Rengar rework or his initial design, I can't remember which at the moment, but either way, clearly it's found a home on Senna's kit, regardless of how little sense it makes with the rest of the kit and how it functions together. And Dawning Shadow was, if you go back and read the Senna Champion Insights article that Riot put out shortly after champions come out, or shortly after they're revealed, and kind of talk about more about the decisions they make while designing the champion, Dawning Shadow is there because, and this is almost a direct quotation, we haven't done a global ultimate in a while. Which, I don't think I need to tell you how little sense that makes to just slap a global ultimate on a champion because, well, we haven't done one in a while and we wanted to do another one. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And finally, looking at Senna's kit and realizing we have one more button to fill out, they basically put Morgana Binding on her W, which be the travel speed, the size of the hitbox, and the range are identical to Morgana Dark Binding. And I don't think I need to tell you how powerful Morgana Dark Binding is. Now, there is a little bit of give and play here, right? Morgana Dark Binding is instant, whereas Last Embrace is over a duration, but is AoE, so there is that at least going for it, but essentially Riot said, well, this has to be a support pick, so we need to have some degree of utility on the kit, so Morgana Binding, right? That's pretty good utility, right? And that's why it's here on the kit. And what this means is you have a champion kit that really doesn't have a lot of internal synergy with each other, right? A lot of champions, even if it's not a tremendous amount of utility, right, like every ability kind of flows in the next, at least you can almost always look at a champion's kit and see at least one evident combo that exists. Even something as simple as Nami E gives slowing autos, which then makes it easier to land a bubble. Or something like you can do Pantheon Empowered Shield Bash into a triple auto attack, which then charges your passive significantly faster, so it gets you another empowered cast of one of your other abilities, right? These are sort of internal synergies that make for satisfying combos, especially for new characters, right? You're able to play the character and do something and say, oh, that's really cool that this ability flows into the next. And Senna does not have that, which I think is already a problem from a champion design, because it makes for a less interesting champion to play when all the champion can do is provide various amounts of utility in sort of a toolboxy fashion, but then even that they don't have any internal synergies with each other. I don't necessarily hate a champion that has a toolbox kit where you're sort of able to look at the individual abilities and say, what do I need at this moment? But even something as simple as Pyke's QE combo, for example, right? Pyke is a very toolboxy kit, and his abilities have a lot of what I would say is lenticular design, and being able to look at very simply what the ability does, but also what are the other possibilities for what this ability could do, right? But at the very least, he does have, okay, I can throw the Q out, and if I land it, they get pulled behind me, so then they'll take the E stun, right? That's the sort of obvious combo that exists in conjunction with the other toolboxiness of his kit, right? Senna doesn't have that, though, and that's because of how she was designed. Senna doesn't actually have any of that built into her kit. Q is a targeted ability. Even though it can miss, it still is a targeted ability. The cast paradigm is completely different. You're not looking to kind of set up and make a play around the fact that this target is going to get rooted, so therefore you can position yourself around minions or look to set up this skill shot. You point and shoot, and it pretty much does the damage. Now, it's guaranteed if they're rooted, but that's not much of a combo. Like, the only, I think, combo Senna has in her kit is just the fact that she can root you and then point blank R you. which feels like a little bit of a waste when it's a global ability, but whatever, right? That's the closest she gets to having an actual combo, and that involves a global ultimate on a long cooldown that she can't use off cooldown or in lane or in any degree of fashion that actually feels okay to use, right? You're committing your entire ultimate for this one potential thing, and that's the only thing Senna feels good about combining her abilities with. Everything else she does has no internal synergy. It's all just generic value, which I already think makes for sort of a bad character design, especially a support who's all about utility, but Senna doesn't even have any degree of combo or skilled nature in her kit. It's hard for a skilled Senna to say, oh yeah, look how I strung my abilities together. She just kind of presses her buttons and gets value for it. And all this comes down to, I think, the biggest design choice that Riot made, which is that Senna was intended to be an AD carry support, or marksman support, I guess I should say. Now, marksman supports have existed in League of Legends before. I'm not going to argue that they didn't. We've had things even like Misfortune support, which saw a brief stint of play when Zyra support was extremely meta, and it sort of made sense for the context of the time and the item system that existed at the time as well. In this situation, though, I do feel like the issue Senna has, in particular, is that her kit was designed to be a marksman support, but essentially without reason. All the other marksman supports we've had before have sort of existed or sort of been played with a specific purpose in mind. Even if it's something as simple as, oh, well, Ezreal has poke and his W can give you bonus movement speed. Okay, sure, fine, whatever. But at the very least, you know, these sorts of characters don't tend to gel well together, and there's a reason for that. And that's because supports are the relationship supports and AD carries have with each other. AD carries have almost always been intended to be very low utility, high DPS characters with one of the best late game fantasies in the game, but which are extremely, extremely weak in the early phases and very, very gold dependent because of the build choices they make and the sorts of things that they do with their kit, right? In that regard, that's sort of why these that's why marksmen get a support in the first place, is because they're extremely weak and because the champions that got historically played at support were champions that didn't need gold, that were actually quite strong in the early game because they didn't care about getting value through items. Their kit had a lot of value built into it by default. So when you take a class that's supposed to be weak early and very gold dependent and pair it with a class that's strong early and doesn't need gold, you can sort of see the problem here in that those two are almost diametrically opposed to each other, right? One is all about high DPS, relatively low utility. The whole point of this class is just to do as much damage as possible, scale to late game, get a ton of gold, and do a ton of damage. And the other class is the complete opposite of that. Entirely about utility, good early game focus, does not need gold almost at all in order to function. And all of a sudden, you can sort of see how this is a problem. And while you can make the argument that, you know, we've had other sort of classes that are at odds with each other, a support assassin, for example, the whole point of supports is that they're intended to provide value to their team that isn't killing people, and that's what an assassin is entirely about. At the very least, it does sort of work with the way Riot has balanced it out, and those two aren't necessarily opposed to each other. We can have assassins with more utility than others. We can have assassins with less lethality than others, right? There's sort of a give and take here that those two classes have with each other, as opposed to AD carries and supports, which have been historically completely at odds with each other. And you sort of see that in Senna's design here. And essentially, I would have been okay with this if there was sort of a reason behind it, right? If Riot had been looking at this kit design that they've been prototyping and say, hey, this character works as an AD carry, but also I could see them being played as a support, and then try to bounce around that. In a similar vein to how Tahm Kench was balanced, where Tahm Kench was initially a tanky top laner, and then Riot realized Ally Devourer was so good that, yeah, people were gonna play this champion at support no matter what we said because of how effective that is. In that regard, that sort of makes sense, but that's not how we started with Senna, as I've kind of talked about already. Senna's design very clearly started from, we want to add these certain things to the champion kit, and we're going to do it regardless of whether or not it's a good idea, all because we want Senna and Lucian to lane together, because they're canonically married. And this gets back to the very first thing I talked about. You have to make sacrifices for thematic cohesion in order to make better gameplay, and I feel like Riot essentially threw that out the door in favor of sort of what I call box-checking design, which is that you're doing it because you haven't done it before. Right? Riot specifically said, we're going to do an AD carry support because we haven't done it before and because we want Senna and Lucian to lane together. And that's why Senna has some of the things she does, right? Some of the generic value that she's supposed to have, and just some of the other parts of her kit. For example, like gaining gold off of the Soul Collection, which I think is completely ridiculous. Obviously, that's an attempt from Riot to solve the problems of highly gold-dependent character also being played in the support position and therefore getting very limited gold. but instead has enabled a whole host of degenerate strategies like fasting Senna, for example, to sort of break the way the game is played because Riot gave her this mechanic in the kit, which is a bit of a problem. So in general, you can kind of see the issues that Senna has just in generally with her design, and quite frankly, the only way Riot will be able to fix this is to balance her either as a support or an AD carry. Like I said before, there's no way to reconcile weakest early game class with one of the strongest early game classes, right? Like there's no way that you can do that without having a design that has no weaknesses or that ends up being abusable in one form or another. I think it would be very easy if Riot made Senna into a utility marksman. She can still have some utility abilities like Ash of Varus, but could be lower DPS overall, so you're basically opting into this character isn't going to melt targets, but they're also bringing a good amount of utility to the table to help kind of fill in for that gap. If you remove the gold generation from Senna's passive, for example, it sort of removes her ability to build marksman items while she's in the support slot, which then makes her into an actual honest-to-God support, which would be totally fine. That way she then has two alternate build paths where she can build total AD carry, I'm going to be farming, I'm going to be getting a ton of gold, and I'm going to be sort of opting into this utility marksman playstyle. Or if she's in the support position, she's not getting a ton of extra gold from picking up souls, which then means she needs to opt into more of a supporting position, which she can totally do. She has pretty good AP ratios, she has a lot of utility, she has a lot of ways to proc abilities, for example, like applying bonus healing and shielding power with her Q, or by taking something like Summon Airy and affecting allies with Curse the Black Mist. There's a lot of ways then Senna could be built then that don't involve around these sort of degenerate fasting strategies that she currently has. So, in general, those are kind of my thoughts on Senna. I've really been thinking about this for a while, guys, so let me know what you think of any of this down in the comment section below, especially if you agree or disagree with any of the points I've made concerning Senna's design. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. It would be really interesting, especially if you play a lot of Senna, to hear what your thoughts are about where her design is at and sort of how she is played or should be played. Again, I would love to hear your guys' opinions on the subject. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well, and I'll likely do more of these as well if you guys end up liking this particular champion rant, so let me know all that down in the comments, of course. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.